Have you ever noticed something strange? The moment you stop texting first, the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop trying to prove your worth, suddenly the other person changes. Out of nowhere, they call. They watch every story you post. They become unusually friendly. Or even more confusing, they become angry. Why? What changed? The truth is, it wasn't you. It was the disappearance of something your brain, and possibly theirs, had unknowingly been feeding for months, or even years. Today, we're going to uncover the hidden psychology behind what happens when someone realizes you've stopped chasing them. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding human behavior through neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, and social dynamics. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the most powerful move isn't saying more, it's often saying nothing at all. Let's begin. Imagine someone has grown accustomed to your attention. Every message, every apology, every attempt to fix problems, every emotional investment. Without realizing it, your attention became predictable. The human brain loves predictability because it conserves mental energy. When someone expects your attention, dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with anticipation and reward, starts firing before they even receive it. This is known in psychology as reward prediction. But something fascinating happens when the expected reward suddenly disappears. The brain treats it like an error. Researchers studying reward pathways have found that unexpected losses activate stress systems much more intensely than expected ones. In simple words, when you stop chasing, you interrupt a psychological pattern. The brain immediately wants answers. What happened? Why aren't they texting? Did I lose control? The silence becomes louder than your words ever were. Here's where most people make a mistake. They think the other person suddenly misses them. Sometimes that's true, but often, they miss certainty. Humans don't just become attached to people. They become attached to routines. If you've ever reached for your phone, expecting a notification that never came, you've experienced the same neurological process. Your brain wasn't craving the notification. It was craving the pattern. When you stop chasing someone, you remove a pattern they unconsciously depended on. And uncertainty is one of the strongest attention magnets the brain has ever evolved. This brings us to the first thing they'll often do. They test the connection. Maybe it's a random text. Hey, how have you been? Or they react to an old social media post. Or they suddenly ask a mutual friend about you. Not because they've completely transformed overnight, but because their brain is gathering information. Psychologists call this information-seeking behavior. Humans naturally reduce uncertainty whenever possible. Think about it. If a light in your house suddenly stopped working, you wouldn't ignore it forever. You'd investigate. Relationships often follow the same psychological principle. The missing attention becomes the broken light. Now here's where things become even more interesting. If the relationship involved unhealthy dynamics, control often replaces curiosity. People who unconsciously relied on your emotional pursuit may experience something researchers describe as a threat to perceived influence. Their internal dialogue changes. They're supposed to chase me. They're supposed to apologize. They're supposed to need me. When that expectation collapses, identity becomes threatened, and threatened identities often react emotionally rather than logically. This explains why someone who ignored you for weeks might suddenly accuse you of changing. Notice the irony. They disappeared emotionally. Have you ever noticed that the exact moment you finally stop chasing someone, something unexpected begins to happen? The silence you feared suddenly becomes louder than every message you ever sent. The person who barely noticed your constant attention now seems strangely aware of your absence. It feels almost impossible, as if they sensed something had changed without you saying a single word. But this isn't magic, and it isn't fate. It's psychology unfolding exactly as the human brain was designed to respond. The human mind is built to recognize patterns. Neuroscientists estimate that your brain processes millions of bits of information every 2. Yet it filters almost all of them into predictable routines. This is one of the brain's greatest strengths because predictable patterns save energy. Every repeated interaction, every morning text, every apology, every effort to reconnect becomes part of a neurological expectation. Eventually, the brain stops asking if the attention will come. It simply assumes it will. That assumption is where everything changes. When someone becomes accustomed to your emotional pursuit, your attention transforms into something that feels permanent. They no longer consciously appreciate its presence because their nervous system has categorized it as normal. Psychologists call this habituation. It explains why people often stop noticing something valuable once it becomes constant. Just as you stop hearing the ticking of a clock after sitting in the same room for an hour, people can stop noticing consistent emotional effort until it disappears. Then one day, you don't send the message, you don't explain yourself, you don't chase after another misunderstanding, you don't beg for another chance. The pattern suddenly breaks. Inside the brain, this unexpected interruption creates what neuroscientists refer to as a prediction error. Research into dopamine pathways has shown that dopamine is not simply released when we receive rewards. It is heavily involved in anticipating them. The brain constantly predicts what should happen next, and when reality violates that prediction, neural activity spikes. Unexpected changes command attention because, throughout human evolution, ignoring the unexpected could mean the difference between survival and danger. That is why silence often becomes impossible to ignore. The absence of your attention suddenly becomes information the brain cannot easily explain. Questions begin forming automatically. Why didn't they text? Why aren't they reacting? Did something happen? Did they finally move on? These questions are not always signs of love. They are signs of interrupted expectation. And this distinction changes everything. Many people confuse renewed attention with renewed affection. They assume someone has finally realized their value. Sometimes that is true, but often, what has actually happened is far more psychological than romantic. The other person's brain is attempting to restore certainty because uncertainty activates powerful emotional systems. Research has repeatedly demonstrated that uncertainty increases mental preoccupation. The human brain dislikes unfinished stories. It searches for answers even when no answers are available. This is why people replay conversations for weeks after a breakup. This is why unresolved conflicts consume more mental energy than resolved ones. The mind keeps searching because it wants closure. When you stop chasing, you unknowingly create an unfinished story. For someone who expected unlimited access to your emotional energy, your silence becomes the mystery. And mysteries demand attention. Think about how your own mind works. Have you ever reached into your pocket expecting your phone to vibrate, only to realize it never did? Many people experience what psychologists call phantom vibration syndrome. The brain becomes so accustomed to repeated notifications that it begins predicting sensations that aren't even there. Now imagine emotional attention functioning the same way. Someone who became accustomed to your constant presence begins expecting emotional notifications from you. Then, nothing. The prediction fails. The nervous system notices immediately. This is why they may suddenly begin watching your social media stories after ignoring you for weeks. This is why they unexpectedly like an old photo. This is why mutual friends suddenly hear questions about how you're doing, not because they suddenly became a different person overnight, but because the brain is investigating an unexpected disruption. Curiosity is one of humanity's oldest survival mechanisms. Our ancestors survived because they paid attention to changes in their environment. A missing sound in the forest could signal a predator. A broken routine could signal danger. The modern brain still carries this ancient wiring. Emotional changes activate many of the same attentional systems because relationships have always been tied to survival, belonging, and protection. The remarkable truth is that emotional absence can become louder than emotional presence. When you were constantly available, your attention blended into the background of everyday life. When you disappeared, your absence became impossible to ignore. This doesn't mean you should disappear as a manipulation tactic. Healthy silence is completely different from calculated silence. One is rooted in self-respect. The other is rooted in control. The difference matters. When you genuinely stop chasing because you've chosen your own emotional peace, your behavior changes naturally. You stop monitoring every notification. You stop rehearsing imaginary conversations. Your nervous system slowly exits the exhausting cycle of anticipation and disappointment. Ironically, this inner shift is often visible before you ever speak. Behavioral experts frequently point out that people unconsciously notice changes in posture, facial tension, voice, and emotional regulation. Your body communicates what your words often cannot. Someone who no longer desperately seeks approval carries themselves differently. Their responses become calmer. Their emotions become steadier. Their decisions become less reactive. Others notice this shift, even if they cannot explain why. And here's something even more fascinating. Stress hormones begin changing as well. Living in a constant state of emotional pursuit keeps many people trapped in chronic psychological stress. Elevated cortisol levels over long periods have been associated with impaired sleep, weakened immune function, reduced concentration, increased anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. While every situation is different, constantly chasing validation can contribute to a cycle that leaves both the mind and body depleted. The moment you stop living for someone else's response, your own nervous system finally has the opportunity to recover. Your sleep improves, your thoughts become clearer, your emotional reactions become less intense. The energy that once fueled endless pursuit begins returning to you. This is why the greatest transformation isn't always happening inside the other person, it's happening inside you. Because every moment you stop chasing, you teach your own brain a new lesson, that your worth is not determined by someone else's attention, that peace is more valuable than uncertainty, that self-respect creates emotional stability no amount of external validation can replace. And perhaps this is the greatest psychological shift of all. When people spend months chasing someone, they unknowingly train their own brains to believe happiness always exists somewhere outside themselves. But the moment they stop, the brain begins building a completely different pattern, one based on confidence instead of fear, choice instead of desperation, freedom instead of emotional dependence. Ironically, this internal transformation is often the very thing others begin noticing, not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally trying less. Less to convince, less to impress, less to force what refuses to happen naturally. And in that quiet space, something extraordinary occurs. You stop measuring your value by whether someone notices your absence. You begin measuring it by whether you can enjoy your own presence. That is the hidden psychology few people ever talk about. The real victory isn't that someone suddenly realizes you've stopped chasing. The real victory is that, for the first time in a long time, you realize you no longer need to. The moment they come back, everything inside you wants to believe the story has changed. Your heart races when their name appears on your screen. The silence that once felt unbearable is suddenly replaced by hope. They apologize. They say they've been thinking about you. They tell you they've changed. For a brief moment, it feels like every sleepless night, every unanswered message, and every tear finally meant something. But before you allow emotion to write the ending, psychology asks a different question. Not, what are they saying, but, what are they consistently doing? The human brain is remarkably vulnerable to words that promise relief. Neuroscientists have found that hopeful expectations can activate the brain's reward system even before real change occurs. This is why a simple apology or a heartfelt promise can trigger a surge of dopamine, creating the emotional sensation that everything is about to improve. But dopamine is a prediction chemical, not proof. It motivates us to anticipate rewards, even when those rewards have not yet become reality. That is why so many people confuse emotional intensity with genuine transformation. Someone can speak with tears in their eyes. Someone can sound completely sincere. Someone can promise that things will never happen again. Yet the brain's emotional centers respond far faster than its logical centers. Long before your rational mind has evaluated the evidence, your nervous system has already begun imagining a happier future. Hope feels wonderful, but hope alone is not evidence. Behavior is. Psychologists have studied this principle for decades. One of the strongest predictors of future behavior is past behavioral patterns, especially when those patterns have been repeated over long periods. Habits are not random decisions. They are deeply embedded neural pathways created through repetition. Every repeated action strengthens connections between neurons, making the behavior increasingly automatic over time. This is why real change is rarely dramatic. It is usually quiet, consistent, repeated. A person who has genuinely transformed does not need to announce it every day. Their daily actions become the announcement. Think about someone who decides to become physically healthier. They do not become healthy because they bought running shoes. They become healthy because they continue exercising when motivation disappears. The same principle applies to emotional maturity. Lasting change is measured not by emotional speeches but by repeated choices made over weeks, months, and years. The tragedy is that many people fall in love with potential instead of patterns. They remember who someone could become. They imagine who someone might be. They cling to promises of a future that has not yet arrived. Meanwhile, the evidence of repeated behavior quietly tells a completely different story. Behavioral scientists often describe this as the intention-action gap. Human beings regularly intend to change without actually changing. Good intentions are incredibly common. Consistent execution is far more rare. This explains why someone may sincerely apologize today and repeat the exact same behavior next month. Their words were genuine. Their habits were stronger. This is not always because they are manipulative. Sometimes it is because deeply rooted behaviors require sustained effort to replace. Neuroscience demonstrates that changing long-established habits requires repeated activation of new neural pathways while allowing older pathways to weaken through disuse. This process takes time, awareness, and consistent practice. One emotional conversation cannot rewrite years of conditioning. That is why actions deserve more trust than promises. Actions cost energy. Words cost very little. Have you ever noticed how some people become incredibly convincing the moment they fear losing you? Suddenly they remember every beautiful memory. They become affectionate, attentive, present. For a while, everything feels exactly as you always hoped it would. Then, slowly, the old patterns begin returning. The late replies, the emotional distance, the broken promises, the inconsistency. This cycle is not random. Behavioral psychology offers an explanation through reinforcement learning. When temporary effort successfully restores the relationship, the brain unconsciously learns that short bursts of change are enough to prevent permanent consequences. Without realizing it, both people become trapped in a cycle where apologies replace accountability and temporary improvement replaces lasting transformation. Over time, this pattern becomes emotionally exhausting. Chronic emotional uncertainty has been associated with elevated stress responses in the body. Research suggests that prolonged interpersonal stress can contribute to increased cortisol levels, disrupted sleep, difficulty concentrating, heightened anxiety, and emotional fatigue. Living in constant unpredictability places a heavy burden on both mental and physical health. This is why consistency feels so peaceful. The nervous system thrives in environments where safety is predictable. When someone repeatedly behaves with honesty, reliability, and respect, your brain gradually reduces its state of vigilance. You stop overanalyzing every text message. You stop preparing for disappointment. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. Your body begins relaxing because it no longer expects emotional danger around every corner. Real love calms the nervous system. It does not keep it trapped in survival mode. Behavior analysts often emphasize that people reveal their priorities through repeated investment. Attention follows importance. Effort follows commitment. Time follows values. Anyone can claim you matter, but where someone consistently spends their emotional energy tells the real story. Imagine planting a seed. You cannot judge whether it will become a tree by looking at the packet it came in. You judge it by what grows over time. Relationships work exactly the same way. Promises are seeds. Behavior is the harvest. One without the other means very little. Another fascinating concept from psychology is cognitive dissonance. This occurs when a person's actions and beliefs conflict with one another. Most people experience discomfort when this happens. They naturally seek ways to reduce that discomfort. Some change their behavior, others simply change the story they tell themselves. This is why you may hear excuses like, "I'm just busy," "I'm under stress," or "that's just how I am." These explanations reduce internal discomfort without requiring meaningful behavioral change. Words can protect the ego. Behavior requires responsibility. And responsibility is where genuine transformation begins. It is also important to understand something many people overlook. Consistency is not perfection. Even emotionally healthy people make mistakes. They forget things. They become overwhelmed. They occasionally disappoint others. The difference is what happens afterward. Healthy individuals take ownership. They repair. They learn. Their actions gradually improve because growth matters more to them than appearing flawless. That is what consistency actually looks like. Not perfection, progress, repeated over time. So when someone reappears after you've stopped chasing, observe with patience instead of urgency. Watch how they communicate when there is no conflict. Watch whether they respect your boundaries without argument. Watch whether they remain emotionally available after the excitement of reconnecting fades. Watch what they repeatedly choose when no one is forcing them to choose it. Because patterns are difficult to fake forever. Eventually, everyone returns to their habits, and habits tell the truth. Perhaps the most liberating realization is this: you are not responsible for decoding endless mixed signals. You are responsible for paying attention to observable reality. If someone's actions repeatedly bring confusion, instability, and disappointment, your answer is already in front of you. You do not need another explanation. You need the courage to believe what you have consistently experienced. The healthiest relationships are not built on convincing yourself that this time will be different despite overwhelming evidence. They are built on two people whose daily behavior quietly demonstrates trust, respect, honesty, and care. No dramatic speeches. No endless guessing, no emotional roller coaster, just consistent actions that make promises unnecessary. Because in the end, words can inspire hope, but only behavior creates safety. Words can paint beautiful futures, but only consistent actions can build them. And once you learn to trust patterns over promises, you stop falling in love with possibilities and start building your life around reality. That single shift has the power to protect your heart, strengthen your mind, and remind you that the truth has been there all along, not hidden inside someone's words, but revealed every single day through what they repeatedly choose to do. Most people believe the greatest victory is making someone regret losing them. They imagine the perfect moment when the person who ignored them finally comes running back, desperate for another chance. It feels satisfying to picture, because rejection leaves deep emotional wounds. But what if the real victory has nothing to do with whether they return? What if the greatest psychological transformation begins the moment you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing yourself? That idea sounds simple, but your brain is wired to resist it. For thousands of years, human survival depended on belonging to a group. Evolution favored people who maintained social bonds because isolation often meant danger. Modern neuroscience suggests that social rejection activates many of the same brain regions involved in processing physical pain. In other words, when someone withdraws affection or repeatedly makes you question your worth, your brain may interpret that emotional loss as a genuine threat. This is one reason rejection can feel physically exhausting. It isn't just in your head. Your nervous system is responding as though something essential has been taken away. This is exactly why chasing begins. At first, it feels harmless. You send one more message. You explain yourself one more time. You forgive one more broken promise. You convince yourself that if you can only say the right words, show enough patience, or love deeply enough, everything will finally change. But something dangerous begins happening beneath the surface. Every time your emotional well-being depends entirely on another person's response, your brain starts outsourcing your sense of safety. Instead of asking, "How do I feel about myself?" you begin asking, "How do they feel about me?" That single shift quietly changes the direction of your life. Psychologists describe self-esteem as something that can be either internally anchored or externally anchored. When it becomes externally anchored, your mood rises and falls according to someone else's attention, approval, or validation. A delayed reply suddenly ruins your afternoon. A cold conversation steals your sleep. A single compliment makes you feel alive again. Without realizing it, your emotional state becomes controlled by circumstances you cannot control. Over time, this pattern can become exhausting. Chronic emotional stress has been linked in research to elevated cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. While cortisol is essential for responding to challenges, persistently high levels are associated with disrupted sleep, impaired concentration, increased anxiety, reduced immune function, and fatigue. Your body was designed to recover after stress, not to remain trapped in it every day. Think about that for a moment. Someone else's inconsistency can slowly influence not only your emotions, but your physical health. That is why self-respect is not a luxury. It is protection. When people hear the phrase, "stop chasing," they often misunderstand it. They imagine becoming cold, ignoring everyone, playing psychological games, pretending not to care. But genuine self-respect is none of those things. It is not emotional distance. It is emotional stability. It means you no longer sacrifice your peace simply to keep someone interested. It means you stop negotiating your boundaries for temporary affection. It means you understand that love without respect eventually becomes emotional survival. Behavioral science repeatedly demonstrates that boundaries shape relationships. Every interaction teaches people what is acceptable and what is not. If disrespect repeatedly receives unlimited access to your time and attention, the brain naturally learns that the behavior carries few consequences. But when healthy boundaries are maintained consistently, expectations change. Not because you forced anyone to change, but because your own behavior became clear and predictable. This is one of the most misunderstood principles in psychology. People rarely treat you according to what you deserve. They often treat you according to what they have learned they can repeatedly get away with. That truth may feel uncomfortable, but it is also deeply empowering, because it means your own choices matter more than you think. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that reflects not your appearance but your daily decisions. Would that mirror reveal someone constantly abandoning themselves to keep others comfortable? Or would it reveal someone whose actions communicate quiet confidence? Confidence is often misunderstood as loudness. Real confidence is remarkably quiet. It doesn't need constant reassurance. It doesn't panic when someone becomes distant. It doesn't chase explanations from people who have already revealed their priorities. Instead, it asks a simple question. Does this relationship bring mutual respect, or does it require me to lose myself? That question changes everything. Neuroscientists studying emotional regulation have found that practices supporting self-awareness and self-control strengthen areas of the brain involved in decision-making and impulse regulation. Over time, choosing thoughtful responses instead of impulsive reactions can help people become more resilient during stressful situations. This means every time you resist the urge to beg for attention, every time you honor your own boundary instead of abandoning it, you are not only protecting your dignity, you are reinforcing healthier emotional habits within your own brain. You are literally practicing a different way of responding. And repetition changes people, not overnight, but gradually. One decision at a time. Many people spend years believing that love requires endless sacrifice. Yet healthy relationships consistently show something different. Mutual effort, mutual curiosity, mutual accountability. No one person carries the emotional weight alone. Imagine two people rowing a boat across a lake. If only one person rows while the other simply watches, exhaustion becomes inevitable. Relationships follow the same principle. One-sided effort eventually creates emotional burnout. Researchers studying relationship satisfaction repeatedly find that reciprocity, the balanced exchange of care, effort, and support, is associated with stronger and more stable partnerships. When one person consistently gives while the other consistently takes, resentment often grows. Balance matters because human beings naturally seek fairness in close relationships. This is why chasing can quietly become addictive. Every small sign of attention feels like relief. Every affectionate message feels like hope. Every apology feels like a fresh beginning. The brain begins associating unpredictable affection with emotional reward. Behavioral psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, and it is one of the most powerful learning mechanisms known. Rewards that arrive unpredictably can create stronger attachment than rewards that arrive consistently. It is one reason unhealthy relationship dynamics can feel so difficult to leave. The uncertainty itself keeps people emotionally invested, but the cycle only continues if you continue participating in it. The moment you step away, something remarkable begins happening. You stop waiting. You stop obsessing. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to recognize it. And slowly, life returns. You sleep more peacefully. You laugh more genuinely. You reconnect with friends you neglected while chasing someone emotionally unavailable. Your hobbies return. Your ambitions return. Your identity returns. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of unhealthy relationships is not losing another person. It is losing yourself while trying to keep them. And perhaps the greatest healing is not finding someone new. It is finding yourself again. One quiet morning, you'll wake up and realize something extraordinary. Their name no longer controls your mood. Their silence no longer feels like punishment. Their approval no longer determines your confidence. That is freedom. Not because they changed, because you did. People often ask, what if they come back? That question matters far less than another one. If they return, will you still abandon yourself just to keep them? Because without self-respect, history often repeats itself. But with self-respect, every future relationship begins from a different foundation. You stop asking people to prove your value. You simply observe whether they recognize it. You stop convincing others to stay. You choose those who already want to. You stop chasing love that demands endless sacrifice. You create room for love that feels safe, consistent, and mutual. In the end, the most powerful person in any relationship is not the one who has the last word. It is not the one who wins the argument. It is not the one who makes the other person jealous. The most powerful person is the one who can walk away from anything that repeatedly asks them to betray themselves. Because the greatest achievement was never making someone miss you. It was becoming someone who finally stopped missing themselves. And when that transformation happens, you discover a truth more valuable than any apology, any promise, or any reunion. The moment you stop chasing people who constantly make you question your worth, you stop running away from the one relationship that will shape every other relationship you ever have, the one you have with yourself. And once that relationship is built on respect instead of fear, no amount of rejection can ever take your peace away again.